Voice matters, voice matters. Hello, welcome, voice friends, to another episode of Interviews on Voice Matters. I am very pleased to introduce Dee Dee Michael, who is a speech language pathologist at the University of Minnesota, at the medical school there. And she has been a speech language pathologist for over 3 decades, a voice teacher for over 4 decades. And the big reason I wanted to talk to Dee Dee is because I got to see a couple of really great presentations at the most recent PAVA conference that was held in Miami. I was not in Miami. I was doing the 2D thing. She was there in person, and she said some stuff that just really hit very deeply for me because of the way I've been trained to work in a functional way with voices. And she just hit on a bunch of points that I think bring us back to a very reasonable, balanced, moderate perspective when we're working with voices. So thank you so much for being here, Dee. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
So basically, like how I like to start all of these interviews is just ask, how did you get into the world of voice and voice science? I mean, obviously you were a teacher, and my brain is like, once a teacher, probably always a teacher, right? So, yeah, how'd you get to voice science?
Well, the way actually a lot of us got to voice science, and that was dealing with some voice problems of my own.
Mm.
So I had a degree in music. It was not a performance degree. I always knew I didn't want a career in performance. I love performing. I do a lot of performing, but that I didn't think that would be a good career for me. But I had a music education degree, and then I did all the things that you have to do for a performance degree anyway. But I called myself secondary choral. And so I thought I was going to be a choir director and then go on, and I didn't know what, maybe choral conducting. And then after college, I started having voice problems, and that was the mid 70s. And at that time, certainly, I mean, there were those sort of science-y voice mechanics kinds of teachers out there, authors, that my teacher absolutely decried. She was one in that camp that said, if you understand the way your voice works, you will sing mechanistically. You will not be able to be artistic. And that was a really common philosophy out there at that time. So I knew nothing about the voice. My pedagogy course probably didn't say the word larynx ever. So there was nothing. And I had zero background in any kind of science or math. I got through 10th grade geometry and never took an algebra class. I got through 10th grade biology, never took physics or chemistry or anything like that. I was an artist, I didn't do math. And still managed to graduate from college with a psych degree, no less. And they said,
Me too.
But I didn't take any of the quantitative classes, and they said, don't tell anybody you got your degree here, because they were embarrassed. But so I knew nothing about the voice, and when I started having problems, I knew nothing about what was going on or what could possibly be going wrong. I was so frustrated. My teacher couldn't help me. I mean, she was quite sure that it was all between my ears, which it probably was. And I think truly the problem was I was trying to be a dramatic mezzo, and really I'm a soubrette soprano, and I wanted to be something else, and I was pushing too hard. But no one had ever told me of, really how do you make power in the voice? What is all of that stuff? I didn't know anything. And there weren't people around to help me. So I think there were some in the mid 70s, there were some speech pathologists who were doing voice, but there weren't voice centers. There just wasn't any of that. There weren't laryngologists in every town. I didn't know about anybody. I had never heard of a speech language pathologist. Um, so I really struggled. It was terrible. I, blew some performances and didn't know what was going to come out of my mouth when I walked out
Wow.
on stage. It was a terrifying time for me. Um, but I did in 1981 get to go to the first interdisciplinary colloquium on the use and care of, I think it was use and care of the professional voice in Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota. So it was modeled after what was then called the Juilliard Symposia,
Mm,
which then became Voice Foundation and became, the Conference on the Use and Care of the Professional Voice. But at that
wow.
time, those symposia were at Juilliard, and there were those guys that, well, Tom Cleveland was probably there, but Johann and Ingo, Ron Shearer, they were young guys, at that time, duking it out about voice science at Juilliard. But anyway, it was an interdisciplinary colloquium. And so there was one at the university, and I got to go to that. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of a speech language pathologist. That was the first time I'd ever really understood that there was actual anatomy and physics that were associated with the voice. I mean, I really didn't know that. It was so jaw-dropping and so eye-opening. And I thought, this is the way I can figure out how to help myself and how to get out of this hole. And so, going to more conferences and doing more reading and learning and all that kind of thing. And then realized that in going to graduate school, I didn't care if I ever walked out on stage again, really.
Mm,
I had no need to get a master's in performance or even choral conducting or anything like that. The master's in speech pathology was the way for me to go. And it was just eye-opening. And not only eye-opening from the voice standpoint, but the whole world of speech pathology is so fascinating. The whole world of communication,
wow.
human communication, and the disorders of communication is just fascinating. So actually, when people come to me now wanting their career in voice science and speech pathology, and they want to do all the voice stuff, but they want to skip the other speech pathology courses, and or if they want to come and do a clinical fellowship, it's no, don't just do voice, do the whole big picture. It will serve you, it will inform you every
Mm,
day of
mm,
your life. All the neuro classes, all of the disorders classes, they will inform you. And that's for a speech language pathologist, or that's for somebody working in a clinic, not necessarily somebody like in a college music department or something. But
right.
certainly for me, that the whole big degree. And then I knew going into it that I would go on and get the PhD, even though I didn't know really what a PhD was. It was a terminal degree, so I figured I'd get one. So, but then it certainly was voice science and that kind of thing. So in doing all of that, and then finding a teacher who had worked with Orrin Brown, that was very helpful, because it was a very different approach than the other approach that I had had. So I can sing now. I'm fine. Thank you. But in the meantime, this whole other life had started. Anyway, so that's yeah, how voice problems, and that makes me very simpatico with my patients. I have been there. I've been to that dark place.
Mm-hmm. This is why I want to talk with folks, because I think our greatest gifts come out of our greatest struggles. Or at least that's one story that
Yeah.
helps me feel better, right? So, but it seems to be true, right? Like the thing that kind of hangs you up is where, and if you're curious and you're looking, that's where you head to. So not only did you have voice struggles, but you went on to literally open a voice clinic, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
amazing to me. How did you end up being part of opening is it the Lion Voice Center or
Lions Voice Clinic.
Lions
Yeah,
Clinics?
we
Yeah.
founded that, developed that. Um, it's kind of a long story, and you'll have to probably edit it out, although it's kind of a cool story. Dr. George Goding, Shep Goding, was the laryngologist at the time who had gotten into the clinic, the ENT clinic at the University of Minnesota. And so as part of my degree, I was in my PhD program at the time. And I asked if I could shadow him for part of a semester and do some kind of independent study. And he said, sure. And then I found out that he was just starting to do Botox injections for spasmodic dysphonia. That was very new at that time. It was 91.
Mm-hmm.
And I got all excited and said, can I be in on the research for that? Because he was going to be doing, researching, recording and studying the voice before and after, and count me in. And then I got lucky enough to be able to do my clinical fellowship year for my, the speech pathology degree. You get the degree and then you have to do your clinical fellowship year.
Mm-hmm.
And just at that time, the other woman who was doing voice at the time went out on maternity leave, and she said, you can fill my maternity leave. So I didn't even have to apply for a job.
Wow.
It fell in my lap. I was right there at the university. It was
Yep.
this marvelous stroke of good fortune. So when I was done with the clinical fellowship year, and I knew I did not want to be working in rehab, and I still needed to finish the PhD, I said to the ENT clinic, why don't I just come and work for you? Just give me a room, give me a tape recorder, give me a keyboard, and you don't have to give me a salary. Just give me a place, and I'll treat your patients, and I'll work for free. And they said, well, that sounds like a good deal. So I was doing therapy, and I was staffing the clinic with Dr. Godding, because both of us believed that that's the model, is that the speech pathologist should walk in there with the physician. And by that time, I was a certified speech language pathologist. So we conducted this clinic with that very interdisciplinary, we are partners kind of model. And because I had been a singing teacher in town for over 10 years, I called all my pals, right, especially collegiate pals, and said, hey, if you've got singers who are having problems, we've got a good clinic, and I'm here now, and I can help, and I can do therapy. And so the singers were just coming in, and so we started with one afternoon clinic, and within a year we had to double it because there were so many singers coming. We had to double our time in clinic. And then, when it came time for me to say, okay, now I kind of need a salary, I was indispensable, right? So I've told so many people this story. Just volunteer for a couple of years until you're indispensable, and then you have to be able to do that. It's a lot of work, but so then within a couple of years, the university, the medical school, or I guess a number of departments within the university already had this close association with the Lions, and the ENT clinic was one of those. The Lions are very interested in human communication. So they had a lot of ear stuff, ears and eyes. And so we wrote a grant proposal to them, Shep Godding and I did, saying, if you're interested in receptive communication, that's the ear, how about being interested in expressive communication, which is the voice? And they said, okay. And so they funded us with all of our first equipment, which the hospital didn't have at that time. And we said, this is like a national embarrassment. We're a Big Ten university, and we do not have stroboscopy here. And the Lions said, oh, we can't have that. So, so they bought our first stroboscope and our,
Incredible.
CSL and all that kind of thing for us. And we became the Lions Voice Clinic. So that was in 1995 when we wrote the proposal, and the thing got up and going in 96. And then we just kept growing since then.
It's incredible to me.
So yeah, I love that story because it was a lot of work and a lot of tenacity and a whole lot of really good luck.
Yep.
But it all came together, and we were driven by this mission of this is how voice care should look.
These are the stories that need to be told, because we think that voice science has been around and it's all so brand new. 95 was not that long ago.
Right. Well, and when you think that stroboscopy didn't really come into being until Hirano in 1979. Voice science is really young.
Yeah.
And that's why I think mostly pedagogy classes at that time, well, in the 70s and even into the 80s, were really thin on honest to goodness anatomy, physiology, certainly the physics end, the acoustics end. Singing teachers went, no.
Right. Just like you were
Oh, I'm an
saying.
artist. I don't do math. Right.
Right. And your teacher, like even the culture of like, no, 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 no. If we understand too much, we're going to miss the art.
Right.
Which
Right.
the opposite seems true. The more I learn, the better I'm getting at singing all the time. Because it's anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, but it all circles back to like the culture that we're in, and can we have both art and science? Absolutely yes.
Of course we can. Of course we can. And you know what? Ingo is a living example of
Mm,
that.
mhm.
I don't know if you were there when he sang at PAVA. Well,
I
he's
saw
he's fun.
videos of it.
Yeah. 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 Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so that, but there's no reason why you can't be very artistic. I think that myth has been entirely debunked by now. That
Yeah. That's the
um
hope anyway. We just have to keep having these conversations and keep doing what we do,
yeah,
right? Like this is
yeah.
you just don't know. There's so many I think there's still a lot of myth out there in the voice world, in the voice teaching world, right? And the more we chip away at it, the better informed people can be and more connected they can be and the more curious they can be, less afraid to ask questions and to dive in, right? Like,
That was what I saw so much early on, especially, is that singing teachers were afraid to admit that they didn't know, they didn't understand,
yeah.
that they were afraid of it. Yeah, I saw that, and so it became sort of my mission in life was to make voice science accessible to singers, to singing teachers, to the lay public. Because I was one of those too. I was terrified of physics and I had to be self taught. I didn't get to take a class in physics or in algebra or anything.
Mhm.
I had to be self taught. Um, and yet it made so much more come alive, make sense. It just made so much more sense to my teaching
Yeah.
and my singing. And I thought you have to get people in a place where they're going to be receptive to it and not be afraid. It can't be too scary.
Yeah.
It helps if it's funny. I don't
It's
ever
all funny
mean
in the
to
end.
be funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's,
So,
and I think still, and maybe this is a guess. I don't have any hard research on this, but sometimes I wonder if voice teaching isn't still a pretty siloed experience because we're all a little bit scared that we don't really know what's going on. I know I've felt that way. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, ooh, I'm doing this thing and it works, but I don't really know how. And like, can you imagine being an engineer and like doing your job, but not knowing what to call things or how things really worked, but you're supposed to do this job, right? Like that's the big reason that I want to know more about it is because I want to be good at my job and I want it to make some kind of sense. If we're going to do something, let's point at something. You know what
yeah.
I mean? And so we're all kind of like, oh, I don't know, you know. So
Beautifully said. Yes, that's I think that's so right. And so then you would see, certainly back in the day, you would see these teachers who wouldn't allow the secrets of their teaching to
mhm,
go out of their studio, and they had all
mhm,
these disciples. And I'm just so against that whole discipleship thing.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm with you on that. Like I really want voice teaching and the whole voice world to be as far away from cult of personality living as we can get, right? Like sound is sound is sound. How you use it and what you do with it is your business, but it's just sound, you know? And this is why it works or doesn't. Anyway, I think we're on the same page there, which is
yeah.
why probably my soul was like, I need to talk with Dee Dee.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think I was really lucky, partly being in Minnesota, where there were a lot of forward thinking people. I mean, one of my pals in the Minnesota Nats was Leon Thurman,
Hmm.
who was certainly I consider him to be one of the grandpappies of vocology. Right.
Wow.
He was out there doing it before anybody else was. And he was also that whole thing of let's understand the voice and let's share with one another and let's talk honestly with one another instead of siloing ourselves or putting ourselves in these ivory towers sort of defensively. So yeah, I was lucky that I had people around me who were like thinking, and
Yeah. It comes through in everything that you read on your bio on the university's website and your conversation too. It's so wonderful. And it brings me to the next big questions that I wanted to ask you. So in your presentation at PAVA this year, you talked about let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Immediately intriguing. Like, what is this going to be, right? And then you talked about functional voice, right? We've got all these great acoustic strategies and people figuring out these wonderful things. And we also have the functional physiology and anatomy of the voice. And that you just can't toss that out. And that little thought had been like spinning in the back of my brain because I went to the acoustic pedagogy course that Ian Howell and Chadley Ballantyne and Ken Bozeman put on in August. Absolutely mind-blowing, amazing, literally the cutting edge of vocal acoustics. And in the back of my head, I'm like, what about the functional stuff too, right? Because that's how I was trained. My mentor, my main mentor and teacher, Tom Blaylock, he's out in Portland, Oregon, and he teaches from kind of the same model that you were pointing to, which is like a little bit of lower register function, a little bit of upper, and then kind of back and forthing it, right? And you broker in very tiny sounds. I broker in small sounds, but your sounds were even tinier than that in working through these ideas, right? And so I just wanted to like bring that concept to the forefront. It's like we need all of the things. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing, right?
Absolutely. And if you talk to Ken or if you read Ken's books, he will tell you that, of course, you need to have that laryngeal muscular balance in order to make any of these acoustic things work out. And he will go even broader, less mechanistically, in continuing to say that a lot of what we do functionally with our larynx comes out of our basic human expression, human communication kinds of needs. So he'll say, use a sob, use a stifled laugh, use all of these things, kind of some of the things that Joe Estel would use these sort of basic human communicative responses to guide you through those vocal things. So he doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. He's all for the acoustics, but he says, of course, you have to have all of that stuff. But I think it does. People get wooed by that glittery thing out there.
Well, say more about that. Like, what made you come up with the title for your presentation? Like, what were you trying to get across? Because people haven't heard your presentation. I have, but they don't know what you were talking about.
Yeah. You know what? I don't remember why I came up with that title, except that I was seeing people who had gone so whole hog into the especially that whole thing that Ingo wrote about, is that this is the music theater singers have these megaphone, and the classical singers have this inverted megaphone. Oh, and that is what I've always said, that singing teachers tend to deal with the oral mechanism, with the jaw and the tongue and lips, because that's what they can see, that's what they know how to manipulate, and they don't really know what's going on down there. And because they're listening to the whole product, which is, obviously it's not it's not just the source, it's the source plus the filter that you get to hear. I think people were getting so wooed by working all of those acoustic aspects of the voice, they were forgetting that you have to have a good laryngeal muscle balance. But I also, so I saw it in two ways. I saw these music theater singers who were coming in trying to do a chest voice dominant production, their high belt mix, bringing chest voice up, which all of the belters will tell you that's not what you do. but they were doing it. And it was all about, as long as you just do ha, you're fine. That's belt. And they were running themselves into vocal problems. Now, that's the people I saw, but I saw people who probably would have had really good voices, but they were being ruined by an incomplete pedagogy that then they were buying into, but they're students and don't know better. So that really worried me. But also at the same time, I've seen this old thing of the classically trained singers who, as long as it sounds very forward and heady, and as long as you have that sort of sound, then we don't worry about muscular balance because we don't even know what that means. All of these baby boomers who were trained in the 60s and 70s, like me, where you were taught to bring your head voice down as far as it will go, and then you don't sing below there. So they were also having these vocal problems, sort of the opposite vocal problem, but it was because everybody was all about this and not about accepting that there has to be some sort of balance within the laryngeal musculature. So that's what I was thinking, is that the this whole thing that used to be the thing, you know, and there was even the I mentioned this in my presentation, that for those of us who were there at the NATS conference in 2008, I don't know if you were there. It was pretty cool, and I think pretty historic, because they got people up on stage with Voce Vista, and they had a laryngograph, and they were, you know, had microphones, and they were singing into Voce Vista. So on the big jumbotron, on the big screen, we had their electroglottographic signal, their spectrographic signal, their waveform and stuff like that. And we could watch all of these singers do all these things, which was pretty cool for NATS. And what they were saying, the big message of that was that, in fact, music theater singers or pop singers or rock singers do use their larynx differently. It is not okay for you, the high and mighty, lofty ivory tower collegiate singer, to say, there is but one good way to sing. And then you just sort of change your style in order to do all these other things. No, there are lots of ways to sing. There are lots of good, safe ways to sing. And NATS had to come to grips with that. And they wrote a joint paper with American Academy of Teachers of Singing.
Or,
yeah, I looked it up.
I don't know.
I looked it up for the paper, and then I've already forgotten. But anyway, that was really cool. But at that conference, you had to say cricothyroid dominant or thyroarytenoid dominant, CT dominant, TA dominant. If you said head voice and chest voice, you were no longer part of the cool kids. So, so even then, there, you know, so in 2008, there was this thing of the registration is a muscular phenomenon. And by 2011, 2012, registration was an acoustical phenomenon.
Okay, that's interesting.
Just based on the writings and the research and the presentations that were going on. And my thought was, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is still really important. This is important. I've been giving lectures on this for decades, but this is still really important too. I just talk way too long.
No, that's what we need to hear about, right? Like, so I like to explain it when people talk about or ask about registration. I usually go, oh gosh, how much time do you have? Right? Because it's really super complex. But I'm like, okay, basically it's two things, right? And stop me if I'm wrong about this, because what do I know? But I see it as a physical registration. So we've got muscles. Hello, this is a physical phenomena. We've got these muscle groups, and they antagonize each other. It's helpful if everyone's strong and balanced, right? So physical registration, and then you've got acoustic registration. And sometimes it's real hard to parse out which one we're pointing at, right?
Absolutely.
But it's one way of thinking about it, so that you can kind of figure out where you are in the weeds. Are you in the acoustic camp right now, or are you in the physical? And maybe that's even too much to separate it out that way, but that's what it seems like to me. And I know I've heard people talk about it this way. Some, I don't know. What are your thoughts on presenting to our clients and patients that there's two things going on?
Well, exactly. You've got a sound wave that originates here, but it gets enhanced for better or for worse by the vocal tract.
Right.
And what you're hearing out here is a combination. It's that radiated spectrum. And you can't ignore that, but you cannot ignore what is the source of the sound wave, and it has to be imbalanced. And if people are having gross muscle fatigue, it's not because the formants are shifting their place, right? It's not because they're not lining up their second formant with their first harmonic or something.
Yes.
They're
Thank you.
Yeah, the fatigue is muscular. Yeah. So or if people can't, if they get to a point where they can't sing on pitch. I mean, I was seeing all of these people who couldn't sing on pitch, and these were good musicians who started out with wonderful pitch.
Wow.
And it would make me crazy. You mean you are going to a teacher every week and they are accepting your money and they are not hearing the fact that you're a half a step flat when you sing a fifth? This is not okay. But I was seeing all of these singers like that. Well, if you're not on pitch, if you're truly, truly not on pitch, that's some sort of muscular phenomenon. So now there are times when you can sound under pitch, or you can sound sharp because of what's happening acoustically. And you have to have a well-trained ear to figure out, is that truly not accurate fundamental frequency, or is that something about the spectral composition of the voice that's leading us to think that it's so. And I've been studying all of that. I guess maybe I should mention this. So I started this line of research early in the 2000s, and first presented it in 2004, back when there was a physiology and acoustics of singing conference that they just started up again. That's cool. Anyway, my thought, having then been a speech pathologist and a singing teacher for quite a while, was that if singing teachers could really listen for the aspects of sound that ostensibly occur at the glottis and sort of separate out the spectral component of the voice, or the acoustic component of the voice, if they could listen to the laryngeal component of the voice, they would be better able to figure out what's going on with a student and help that student. Because I was also sick and tired of getting students, especially college students, into the clinic, and they're 3 months before their senior recital and they can't sing. Their voice is absolutely shot. And they've been working on getting it a forward. They've been working on breath support and forward focus. And they have honking nodules.
Yeah.
Did you not hear? But if you get that sort of airy sound, come on, get the voice of sound, get it forward, get some breath support. And it wasn't going to work. And then all of these kids, can't give their senior recital, or they can't do the role in the opera or whatever, because they really can't do it. So I thought, if singing teachers could learn to hear what characteristics of voice are glottal and what characteristics of voice are supraglottic, it would be helpful. So I started this line of research, teaching singing teachers to recognize the classic three: roughness, breathiness, and strain. Those are the now it's called Cape V. It was called Gerbas back then. Grade, roughness, asthenia, breathiness, asthenia, strain. Are the characteristics of glottal sound. So that research was coming along. It turned out that if you presented these characteristics of voice as a singing teacher, they could go, oh, okay, that's cool. I recognize that. And now I have a jargon for it. I have terminology. I have a lexicon, and I can start listening for that. And teachers would go, yeah, I started listening differently to my students because I now had a lexicon for this. But included in this thing that we were asking teachers to learn to listen for and rate, systematically, was intonation. And because intonation would be the gold standard, right? That's the objective of all of the subjective judgments that we make about voice, like placement and focus and beauty and warmth and all that kind of thing. Intonation should be objective.
Yeah.
Oh no, teachers could not agree on intonation. I was
What?
shocked. Teachers cannot agree on intonation.
Huh.
And then that started my research in this whole other direction. And Marina and I did a bunch of studies on this, and it's written up in Nats. It came out in the Journal of Singing. I don't know. I think sometime during COVID. No, I don't remember. I don't remember the years of all my own articles. But anyway, that we found that teachers were so discrepant. Like if you had somebody singing, somebody who was basically accurate, and teachers were asked to rate them on a 120 millimeter scale. It's 0 is the most inaccurate and 120 is the most accurate. And one teacher would give a 4 and one teacher would give a 114 for the same singer. Whoa. Right. Scary.
That begs all kinds of questions.
Right. This is quite provocative. So that's what we did. This is in 2012. We auto-tuned them. We took these recordings of all of these singers and auto-tuned them. Right? So they were all perfectly accurate, and the teachers still could not agree on the accuracy, and they still would judge singers as being grossly inaccurate when they were
pitch perfect.
Accurate.
Yeah,
pitch
absolutely.
perfect.
Yeah.
And so then we went down a rabbit hole about, well, what were the characteristics of the voice that made it sound out of tune to these teachers? And the problem was what we couldn't find an answer, but what we finally decided was, because there is no answer. If two different teachers hear two radically different things, it isn't because the singer is too bright or too backward or too throaty or whatever it is. It's because we don't all agree on what we hear. Our perception is not the same. And we'd better come to grips with that as a nation of singing teachers, that intonation is as subjective as anything else about the voice.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Dang.
I mean, I have a side example of that from 2 weeks ago when I did we were tuning some vocals that I recorded, and clearly my pitch was under. Visually, it's under. However, the vibrato at the end, the stylistic vibrato at the end of the note made it sound in tune. And if we took the portion that was more straight tone and bumped it to where it's supposed to be, it sounded wrong. And it was predicated on the end of the note. And I had never seen that before. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, right. And I can finish your sentences. Did it sound sharp once you bumped it up? Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we discovered in the research was there did seem to be a certain group of teachers who, if there was no vibrato, they could not hear something as being in tune. Which is hilarious in a sense, because if somebody sings with vibrato, then they spend a whole lot of their time singing not in tune. And yet they were perceived to be more in tune, and anybody with a straight tone was not considered. And that was for some teachers and not from others. But we made sure that all the teachers who were judges were conversant and comfortable in a lot of genres of singing. They did choral, they did non-traditional sounds. So it wasn't just that the classical singers had to have vibrato.
Fascinating.
It really is fascinating. But it does then bring me back to the way speech language pathologists are taught to listen for things may actually be helpful for singing teachers. And that's why, I think SVI teachers probably have a leg up.
We all need each other.
Well, we all need each other, and we need to keep going to these conferences, and PAVA is so useful because there's that dialogue and we learn from each other, but we do it in a pleasant, fun way that's not so scary.
Yeah, that's why I'm also grateful for these conversations. So thank you for taking the time, because there's so many things that need to be talked about all the time. So any little bit of it that we do, I think, is a helpful drop in the bucket.
I agree. Absolutely. And I'm glad there are people listening.
Yeah. So to keep going, I do have one more big thing that's that I'd like to talk about, because I think it's really, I've never really had this conversation explicitly with anyone, and I want to see what you think about it. And it's just about, so people say, oh, she's in her head, or they feel like they're in their head about something. And I'm like, maybe so. However, the voice is a physical phenomena. And if there's something physical going on, it is not in your head. And I think it's so important to encourage people to understand that just because they can't do something or something feels off doesn't mean that they're like mental or emotionally screwed up or something. And I think so many people, because now we've made that connection, right? That the emotions and the psyche really affect our physical body and vice versa, right? You cannot take those apart. But now that we know that, everybody wants to go, oh, no, it's just in my head. And maybe it's not, you know? Like, do you think about this?
Well, all the time.
Yeah, right.
I'm a singer who's perfectly capable of getting into her head. And I think there are a couple things to that. I so agree that, and boy, so many layers to this.
Right.
I don't know where to start. For one thing, I do think that every little thought that you have in your mind will affect how your muscles work. And with the singing mechanism, oh my gosh, those thoughts can sabotage muscle adjustment so fast. It's just amazing. And having been one who was trying to fix a voice problem that was really because of muscle imbalance. There was nothing wrong with my vocal folds. It was my muscles. And it was just amazing to me how I could say, okay, that was good. I'll do it exactly the same way. And then something entirely different would come out. Because we don't have accurate sensation of the moving parts, right? We're basing everything off of sympathetic vibrations and stuff. If we could feel our vocal folds, if we could feel our cricothyroid muscle, that would probably be helpful. But we don't. So there is kind of that thing, well, it's got to be in my head because I don't feel it. Or the opposite is people think they can feel their vocal folds, right? So they come in, I know my cords are swollen, or I know my cords are doing something wrong, or I know I have nodules. Everybody is positive they have nodules and they have muscle tension. So we have this inaccurate sensation, and that's a problem. And the fact is, our psyche absolutely does affect what comes out. But one of the things I'm very fond of saying is life is a rocky road, and it is your technique that will get you through. You can't count on just having a pure artistic intention to make a good sound. You have to have a robust and balanced technique, and count on that at those times when you're going to get in your head and it's going to make you crazy. You have to have established that robust technique. And so I think teaching has to address that. This is what you're doing technically. It can't just be about expressivity. I mean, that would be nice.
Yeah.
but then somebody eventually is going to run into problems,
Yep.
and then what do you do?
Yep. That's
So am I getting to what you're saying too?
absolutely, like it's all interrelated, right? And it's never going to be one thing or another. And again, coming back to the title of your presentation, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Some sometimes I want to create a podcast
Oh,
called Let's Be Reasonable. Like, let's just be reasonable, shall we? Like it's all the things. You have to be able to hold all of these pieces at the same time, which is why we need voice teachers and why we need speech language pathologists and why we need doctors, because there's so many pieces to hold. And
right.
I guess the large point that I was pondering this morning before we started was just like you don't know until you know, right? And you can't assume it's just nodules, or you can't assume that it's just your emotional imbalance, or you know what I mean? There's just a lot, and there's a lot to explore, and it takes a while sometimes, as you well know, to put all these pieces together to figure out
Yeah.
what's going on for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, I absolutely see that. Was working with a singer recently who had been struggling for quite some years anyway. And she had gotten all in her head about her voice and was, getting to the point where she was just clamping up and couldn't sing. And she was really, really struggling. And she was, oh, I'm just so in my head. I'm just so in my head. But you know what? You're also not breathing. Oh, let's talk about how you breathe, because that could actually help maybe, and then you wouldn't have to be so in your head about it. So yeah.
Um, yeah, that's it. And I this is the big reason that I wanted to talk with you too, is because what you're presenting and the way you think is so affirming to what I see to be true for people, in that I was trained by a person who, again, Tom Blaylock, who preaches balance, 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 balance. And if you cannot do these smaller things, you don't really have any business doing the bigger sounds, right? And granted, that's a perspective, I get it, but it works. Like I keep working with just balance, right? That's how I was trained, makes sense to me. And then here you are bringing that back to the forefront in the conversation, and it well, let me just say this. The word balance feels really good right now. You know?
Sort of metaphorically and on a global sense and everything,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
you understand.
Balance, but it is. And even if somebody comes into the clinic with a specific voice problem, even with a lesion or something like that, the way we're going to get them back into health is not to put a particular band-aid on a particular thing. It is going to be to bring the entire mechanism back into a healthy balance and then make that the default forever. So yeah, I can't agree more that I think balance is so important, and balance in all of the ways you present it. You can't just be a one-trick pony as a teacher.
Yeah.
You can't have your one thing that you like to do with people, and that's your pedagogical philosophy, and they have to kowtow you. Yeah.
Well, you can, but I think the conclusion eventually is that that's going to either run out or you're going to run into problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we know that, then we can learn things, and then I don't know. I think, yeah, we all have our thing, and it's important to know that there's always going to be more than you think there is. Even in this conversation, like we're touching on a lot of aspects, but there's always going to be more, right? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're right. Yeah, yeah. It's bigger than that. Um, so, but coming back to that idea that when you wrote to me that first email, it was yes and.
Mm,
It's not either or, it's yes and. Yeah,
yeah.
which is another way of saying balance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as the more conversations we have, the more work we do, the more we learn, the more mature we'll all become, and being able to hold many, many pieces at the same time, and yeah, and just stay open and curious. So
Yeah.
I so appreciate that about you. And it must be noted that you've been heavily involved in the PAVA conference organization over the last many years, which is how I first heard about you. And so I know I speak for a great many people when I say thank you for all of that work. It is, those
Oh,
conferences are no small feat. I don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that, but I know it's a lot, and they're just wonderful. So the community really, really owes you a debt of gratitude on that.
well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for your important work in PAVA too. I think it's sort of unsung and unknown, but people don't know how important you guys are and will continue to be.
When you say you guys, who are you?
The ethics committee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I've just so the audience knows, I've been serving on the ethics committee for a couple years with under Marina Gilman. So it's been a great, great uh it's just been great work. I've loved it so much. So
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for saying
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
Very highly of you, very, very highly. And there's another place where balance. Yes, and many perspectives. But
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much. And I know I can find you on the internet through the university website.
yeah, Lions Voice Clinic. Oh, that website needs more updating, but have at it. There's good information that hasn't changed. No
Okay.
one's changed the muscle names or anything.
Well, we'll put some
So,
links in the show notes below so people can find you that way if that's all right.
sure, absolutely. Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
is it okay if maybe we talk in the future at some point and see if something comes up or we want to?
Sure, of course. Yes, I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you. And thank you for the affirmations. Thank you for being you. You do a
Oh,
great service, and I appreciate it. I think there's a big wide world out there that appreciates this kind of thing. So
yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. You're welcome. And thank you too. We'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Okay.
All
Yes.
right.
Thanks. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Voice matters. Voice matters.